Have you ever wondered why some students walk into the biology board exam with absolute confidence, while others spend the entire exam panicking over which question to attempt first? It's not because they study more, it's because they know exactly what to study. Today, I'm going to reveal the most important, high-yield, exam-focused biology topics that will dominate the 2026 Class 12 board exam. These aren't random chapters. These are the chapters with the highest weightage, the most predictable question patterns, and the greatest scoring potential. And if you understand these in the next 10 minutes, you'll walk into your exam with a strategy that 95% of students never use. So stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll have a complete blueprint to score 95 plus, even if your preparation hasn't started yet. Before diving into specific chapters, you need a clear map of what actually carries marks. Students often get overwhelmed because biology feels like it has too many facts, too many definitions, and too many diagrams to memorize. But when you filter out the noise and look closely at past papers, patterns, and teacher predictions, you begin to see that only a handful of units repeatedly decide your final score. The Biology Class 12 exam heavily relies on conceptual clarity in a few major units: reproduction, genetics, biology and human welfare, biotechnology, and ecology. These units together contribute the highest marks overall. What makes them so scoring is not that they are easy, but that they are predictable. The question patterns rarely change. The diagrams repeat. The terminology remains constant. And most importantly, the same concepts reappear year after year. A smart student doesn't study everything equally. A smart student studies strategically, allowing them to secure marks quickly and efficiently. If you're someone who is preparing late, this blueprint becomes even more valuable. And if you're already well prepared, this blueprint makes your revision 10 times stronger. So keep this structure in mind as we explore each unit in detail. Human. Reproduction remains one of the most prominent chapters because the entire chapter revolves around sequential processes. This means examiners can pick any specific stage: fertilization, implantation, gametogenesis, hormonal regulation, and easily form short, long, diagram-based or case-based questions. To master this chapter, you need to understand the structure and function of the male and female reproductive systems, not as isolated diagrams, but as interconnected systems working toward one biological purpose: reproduction. Spermatogenesis and oogenesis involve step-by-step phases, each with characteristic changes. When you memorize them as flow-based progression rather than individual facts, you retain them faster. Fertilization, embryonic development, implantation, pregnancy, parturition, these are all natural sequences. When the process itself is chronological, the learning automatically becomes easier. Questions often come in the form of: explain the events following fertilization, or describe the hormonal control of menstruation. These questions require conceptual clarity, not mugging. The topic of menstrual cycle is another predictable favorite. You must know follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, hormonal roles, and what negative and positive feedback mechanisms occur. A surprising number of board questions directly come from this single diagram. Reproductive health is equally important. Topics like contraceptive methods, assisted reproductive technologies such as IVF, ICS, IZIFT, and GIFT often form direct 3-mark questions. You do not need complex details, just the definitions and the core mechanism. When revising this chapter, focus on 4 things: diagrams, hormone charts, chronological sequences, and definitions. If you know these 4 components well, you can score full marks from this section easily. Many students ignore this chapter thinking it's just theory, but in reality, this chapter gives extremely straightforward questions. Reproductive health covers contraception, medical termination of pregnancy, sexually transmitted infections, fertility issues, and art technologies. Every year, at least one question comes from contraceptive methods: barrier, hormonal, surgical, and natural. Understanding how they work, their advantages, and limitations makes it simple to write full-length answers. There are also frequent questions on why reproductive health is essential in a growing population. These are conceptual but easy. Assisted reproductive technologies such as IVF and surrogacy also appear regularly. The key is not to remember every step, but to understand the basic goal: helping couples with infertility. The moment you understand the purpose, the terminology becomes intuitive. If human reproduction is predictable, genetics is powerful. This chapter forms the backbone of the biology exam because examiners can draw dozens of logical, numerical, diagram-based, or reasoning questions from a single concept. The Mendelian genetics continues to dominate board questions. Monohybrid and dihybrid crosses, dominance relationships, phenotypic ratios. These are classic, repeated, evergreen exam items. Understanding segregation, independent assortment, and the logic behind Punnett squares is far more important than memorizing ratios. Pedigree analysis is another scoring area. You do not need complicated genetic understanding to interpret pedigree charts. You only need to follow simple visual clues: skipping generations, likely recessive, more males affected, possibly X-linked, appears in every generation, likely dominant. With just 4 or 5 rules, you can correctly infer most pedigree patterns. Molecular genetics, which includes DNA structure, replication, transcription, translation, and operon models, is another powerhouse. Students often fear it because it seems long. But once you break the chapter into processes, DNA to RNA to protein becomes intuitive. Each process has a clear start, steps, enzymes, and outcomes. The more you visualize, the easier it gets. The operon model, especially the LAC operon, is a guaranteed question. You must know what happens when lactose is present or absent. This diagram alone is worth 3 to 5 marks. This chapter rewards understanding over memorization. Students who rely on mugging struggle. Students who visualize pathways succeed. The beauty of evolution is that it relies more on logic than memorization. If you understand natural selection, adaptation, gene flow, Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, and speciation, you can easily answer most questions. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium often appears as a reasoning-type question. You don't need to solve mathematical calculations unless asked. You simply need to explain what happens when equilibrium is disrupted. Fossils, homologous structures, analogous structures. These topics are easy and predictable. The kinds of questions asked rarely change. Although some students feel overwhelmed by this chapter, it is actually one of the most straightforward once broken into logical chunks. You must know DNA structure, double helix, antiparallel strands, base pairing, DNA replication, semi-conservative model, enzymes involved, transcription, how RNA is made, translation, how proteins are made, genetic code characteristics, mutations, regulation of gene expression, especially lac operon. Instead of memorizing lines word for word, understand sequences. What happens first, second, and last. This chapter is simply a chain of events. Diagrams are crucial in scoring. Biotechnology forms one of the easiest scoring units because the processes are highly structured. Recombinant DNA technology, vectors, host organisms, enzymes like restriction endonucleases, ligases, PCR and their applications are staples of board questions. PCR polymerase chain reaction is a must-know topic. Understand denaturation, annealing, extension. This 3-step cycle repeats, doubling DN, a simple process, high scoring. Applications like producing insulin, DNA fingerprinting, gene therapy, they appear repeatedly. Biotechnology also helps you score with diagram-based questions if you have memorized the steps. This chapter includes topics ranging from immunity to diseases to microbes and industrial applications. It is easy because most concepts are intuitive and often relate to real-life examples. The immune system, innate versus adaptive, antibodies, vaccinations, is a predictable topic. Questions often involve explaining processes rather than memorizing complex details. Diseases like malaria, typhoid, and viral infections commonly appear in short notes. Microbes in household products, curd, bread, cheese, industrial fermentation, sewage treatment, these are direct scoring topics. But this chapter is a gift if you revise it smartly. This is a fully theoretical chapter with repeated question patterns you only need to remember. Microbes in food production, microbes in industrial production, microbes in sewage treatment, microbes as biocontrol agents, microbes in bioremediation. Each point forms a predictable question. Memorize the examples and the process. That's all. Ecology questions are always straightforward. There are no tricky numericals or complex pathways. You simply need to understand the relationships between organisms, their environment, and the flow of energy. Ecosystem structure,